Okay, so if you have I is equal to root negative 1, because a negative, taking it out just means that we have an I. And the square root of 1 is just 1, so it's an invisible 1i. So if you can remember that, then that means that if I had I squared, then that means that it would be root negative 1 times root negative 1. And the definition of square roots means a square root times a square root, so a number times itself, square rooted, is itself. So if I have the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1, well, that's the same number. So then I squared has to just equal negative 1. So you have to remember this. That's the most important. Is, oh my goodness, not that. I squared equals negative 1, not the square root of negative 1. So you got to remember that. I squared equals negative 1. That is super important to remember. And if you can remember that, everything else is easier. Okay, so I'm just going to start simple. So if I have 5 times 2 plus 3i, then we're just distributing the 5. And this is just as if it were just a variable. So I'd have 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 3 is 15, so we'd have 15i. And I can't go any more simple, so that's it. Okay, if I have 6 minus 4i times 2 plus 5i. Okay. Sorry, Trent just got home. So then I'm just going to FOIL it. So just like those are variables, except before the x's happen to be the first one. But now they're at the back. So you're just going to FOIL. So 6 times 2, the first, is 12. And then 6 times 5i, that's positive 30i. Negative 4 times 2 is going to give us negative 8i. Negative 4i times 5i, so that's going to give us negative 20. And then I times I is just going to give us I squared. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Okay, so now I can combine like terms. And another huge thing is we need to remember I squared equals negative 1. Well, here's an I squared. So instead of I squared, I can just rewrite all of this and put negative 1. Times negative 1. So negative 20 times negative 1, that's just positive 20. So 12 plus 30i minus 8i plus 20. And now I have like terms. So 12 plus 20 is 32. Positive 30i minus 8, so 30 minus 8 is positive 22i. That's it. So the hardest thing is just remembering I squared is equal to negative 1, so you just plug that in for I squared. So you times it by that number. So it was positive 20. So if it were positive, then that negative 1 would make it negative. Okay, let's try another one. So this is, if I had 2 minus 3i, when you change this to plus, that makes it a conjugate. So I wrote another conjugate for you to get rid of a radical. That's the same thing with i's. So if it's a minus, a plus. And the reason being is because this will completely eliminate i's. Just like before, it completely eliminated square roots for you. And that was on, I think I just wrote it on a paper and took a picture of it and sent it to you. So that's what I'm referring to. So if they had, I'm just going to do this. So 5 minus 7i. Try and think of what would that conjugate be. So what would you have to multiply by? It would be 5 plus 7i. Okay, so if you have this, then, so that was just an example, just to try and figure out how to get the conjugate. So if you have 2 times 2 is 4. And this might just be a problem. I'm going to show you why I'm even showing you why you would do a conjugate in just a second. So 2 times 2 is 4, and then we have plus 6i minus 6i. Negative 3 times 3 is negative 9i squared. So I squared makes that a negative 1. So negative 9 times negative 1 is just positive 9. Okay, now when it had a minus 3i and plus 3i, you're always going to get opposites there. So plus 6i minus 6i just means 0. So 4 plus 9 is 13. And let me tell you when this is helpful. I'm not sure if they're going to have you do this, but just in case. So if you had 6 over, let's say, 1 plus 4i. If you have that and they say to get to simplify this, you can't have an I on the denominator, meaning on the bottom of a fraction. So how we do that is you can get rid of i's by multiplying by its conjugate. We just saw that in that example right there. So the conjugate of 1 plus 4i, what would that be? So it's just going to be 1 minus 4i. And whatever you multiply to the bottom, you have to multiply to the top. So 1 minus 4i on top and on bottom. So 6 times 1 is 6 minus 24i. Okay, and then on the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. And then it's going to be negative 4i plus 4i minus 16i squared, which I squared is just negative 1. So negative 16 times negative 1, I'm just going to make that positive 16. So what I do is when there's an I squared there, I just change the sign in front of it. So it makes it easier so you don't have to keep on rewriting it. Okay, and then minus 4i and plus 4i go away. 1 plus 16 is 17. So 6 minus 24i is our answer. And you do have to check, though, is there a number that goes into all 3 of those numbers? So 6, 24, and 17, no. 17's prime, so you know for sure it won't. Okay, let's try one more. So this one, there aren't any i's, but as you can see, we have a square root of a negative and a square root of a negative, which technically means there are i's. We just have to simplify these. So we're going to have 4 minus square root of negative 49 is 7i. 3 plus, okay, root negative 81. So root 81 is 9. That negative makes it an I. And then we're just going to FOIL. So 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 9i is 36i. Negative 7 times 3 is negative 21i. Negative 7 times 9 is negative 63, and then we have I squared. So I squared, that's just going to change this as a negative, so now it's a plus. So if that were a plus and you had an I squared, then you just change it to a negative. Okay, so 12 plus 63 is going to give us 75. 36 minus 21, so 6 minus 1 is 5. 3 minus 2 is 1. So 75 plus, that's a 15, sorry. That's really ugly, sorry. 75 plus 59, that's it. Okay, I hope that helps. Let me know if you had different multiplication ones than the examples that I've shown, and then I can just like do them and take a picture of it and send it to you.